Hello from the U.S. Department of State. I'm Navbahor Imamova, reporting for the Voice of America. We will be talking to Donald Lu, Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia today. Obviously, we'll be discussing the U.S. policy on the region. What kind of cooperation does the Biden administration have with Central Asian governments today? What are the priorities, especially when it comes to supporting Afghanistan or to achieving whatever Washington and Central Asian governments want to see in that country, as well as the impact of the Western sanctions on Central Asian economies and some of the recent decisions that this administration has made on certain entities in the region. We will definitely talk about human rights. We will talk about the scope and the pace of the political reforms that the leaderships in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan claim they're carrying out. So stay tuned and watch us. Thank you so much for talking to us, for being available.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for
to have a
inviting
conversation with us. This is a post-American Central Asia. It's nearly a year since the United States left Afghanistan, and for the longest time, what we heard both in the region and here was that Afghanistan is a priority. Is it still a priority? Because from the military establishment, we hear that it still is. But what are your main concerns or, let's say, goals in the region right now? I know you have a long list of, strategic aims, but
Sure.
Currently, what are you really focused on?
So I was just traveling in Central Asia last month. They were great visits. People were so friendly and welcoming. But we had several things on our mind. We were trying to understand what the effect is of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the people of this region. We know that some of the economies are really suffering. We can see food prices are rising, fuel prices are rising, migrant workers are being forced home. It's very hard to export. We're trying to determine, as a partner of Central Asia, what can we do to help? We don't want to come to pressure, but we do want to come with a message that we can be a part of helping to solve these problems together.
And what is that assistance going to be about?
Well, there'll be several things that we're doing. First is we're trying to help educate some of the governments about what are the sanctions that they need to be careful about. Right? The worst thing for these economies is if they get caught up in some of these global sanctions. So they've been talking to us, we've been sharing information that's helpful.
And they already are in some ways. An Uzbek firm is now blacklisted, which is based in Tashkent.
We are very pleased with the good communication we have with the governments of the region.
Over this?
None of them want to have their companies, their individuals sanctioned, and I think we're being actually quite successful in avoiding that. It's not 100%, but we're doing a really good job. Well, I would note we're also providing licenses for Russian banks that are trying to get out of Kazakhstan. Right? We want those Russian banks to be sold to Kazakhs, so they become Kazakh banks. We want to make sure that we are providing licenses that make it very clear that the CPC pipeline and Kazakh oil are immune from sanctions, because that's the last thing we want to do is to hurt the oil and gas industry of this region.
So the message then is be careful, beware, don't do anything that's going to aid the Russian government or the Russian military, but at the same time, if you have businesses connected with Russia, let us help you bypass sanctions.
Let us help you explain what is sanctioned and what's not sanctioned. We are not directing sanctions against the Russian people. The sanctions are very clearly against Mr. Putin, his inner circle of elites, some government officials, and the Russian military.
How
right?
concerned?
If you can avoid these things and some of the banking system, you can avoid Russian sanctions. You just have to be smart about it.
How concerned should the Uzbek government be now that at least one firm is blacklisted?
Well, we again have excellent discussions with Uzbek officials about these issues. We have about this specific company. I know we're going to have excellent cooperation. I'm not worried about it.
How about with the Kazakh government, where at least a couple of banks are on sanctions list?
A couple of Russian banks are on sanctions list, but they are selling those banks to Kazakh people. I love that, right? Because Kazakhstan will be stronger when it owns the big banks that operate in its country. So I think that's a win-win for people of Kazakhstan.